So now that you know the coverings of the brain, so using this knowledge, can you tell me the coverings of the optic nerve? Okay, see, this is the optic nerve, what is in pink color. This is a special stain that is being used, whereas this light blue color is for the meninges. Yes, so this is the outermost layer of the meninges. So can you name this layer? You can type it in the chat. It's the outermost layer here. Label this outermost layer of the meninges. Yes, it's the dura mater. This is the dura mater. Next, in this slightly purplish color, the middle layer of the meninges. Yes. Yes, I think you type this answer. It's arachnoid mater. Good. Easy enough. And what about this innermost layer? Another blue color layer, the innermost layer of the meninges. That is the pia mater. Good. So now you all know clearly in your mind, they're just like the brain has the three meninges covering it. Since the optic nerve is embryologically a prolongation of the brain, the optic nerve also has these three coverings: dura, arachnoid, and pia. So these are the coverings of the optic nerve, whereas the substance of the optic nerve, just take a look at the substance of the optic nerve. It is composed of myelinated nerve fibers. Now you look carefully, this pia mater will give rise to septum or septae. These are incomplete pial septae. See, look at the septae, which is extending into substance of optic nerve and is giving off branches. These pial septae will divide the optic nerve into incomplete lobules. Okay, there are lobules present and they are incomplete lobules. My next question is, you have learned before in histology, there's another organ also in which the connective tissue capsule sends septae into the parenchyma and divides that structure into incomplete lobules. You've learned another structure in histology before. So which structure is it which has incomplete lobules? You can type it. That's very good. It's the thymus, which you've learned in lymphoid tissue. Good. So remember, the optic nerve also has incomplete lobules. Yes, now another special feature of the optic nerve. In the center of the optic nerve, there are two blood vessels. It is the central retinal artery and the central retinal vein. So here we identify this as the vein because it is having a collapsed lumen. And this is just to show you the coverings again of the optic nerve. This is the hematoxyl and eosin stained preparation. This is the dura mater, the outermost layer. The second layer is arachnoid mater. The innermost layer is pia mater, which gives septae, the pial septae, to divide the optic nerve into different incomplete lobules. Okay. These are the points that I have mentioned. So please remember, the central retinal artery and vein is present in the center. So this central retinal artery and vein is an important feature which will help you to identify the slide when you look at it under the microscope. Sometimes you may get confused between optic nerve and peripheral nerve. Okay, but you can look for the differences between optic nerve and peripheral nerve. So can anyone tell me a few differences between the two, between peripheral nerve and optic nerve? Because we've spoken this much about each. If anyone can answer in the mic, that would be good. Yes, what are the differences, at least a few differences between the optic nerve and peripheral nerve? Okay, you can say the differences between the coverings. Okay, just one or two differences. Can anyone speak up? Yes, this answer, you can speak on the mic. Okay, just two differences between optic nerve and peripheral nerve. Yes, Nitin.
In the peripheral nerve, the coverings are outer epineurium, middle perineurium, and inner endoneurium. Whereas in optic nerve, the coverings are outer dura mater, middle arachnoid matter, and inner pia mater. And in the optic nerve, there is a central retinal artery and central retinal vein, whereas it is absent in the peripheral nerves.
Yes,
And
good.
the presence of septa is in the optic nerve, whereas it is absent in the peripheral nerve.
Yes, very good. Very good, Nitin. Yes, that's good. So please try to learn this today itself, class. And next, central retinal artery is a branch of which artery? You can just take a wild guess. You can type it in the chat. Since we're talking about the optic nerve, which artery do you think gives rise to the branch central retinal artery? Anyone can just guess the answer. This doesn't have to be right necessarily. What do you think? Which artery gives rise to the branch central retinal artery? Yes, ophthalmic artery. Yes, it's ophthalmic artery. Good. Please keep that in mind. Okay, ophthalmic artery gives rise to central retinal artery. This is how you'll draw the diagram of optic nerve. If you've drawn peripheral nerve earlier, you would remember the peripheral nerve, you drew only one layer as the covering, which was the epineurium. Whereas for optic nerve, you're just going to draw three lines, which are the three meninges, dura, arachnoid, and pia mater. Then from the pia mater extending into the substance, you're going to draw incomplete lobules that are formed by the pial septae. Okay, these are the pial septae. Just draw it as arcs. Okay. And incomplete lobules means in between you have to leave a gap. So this lobule will be communicating with the adjacent one. When you're drawing the nerve fiber, it is similar to the peripheral nerve. You're going to draw a dot here, which is the axon, and surrounding it. Yes. And in between the nerve fibers, you can see the nuclei, which are present in between. They are the nuclei of oligodendrocytes. So that's one more difference between the optic nerve and peripheral nerve. Okay, in peripheral nerve, you saw the nuclei of Schwann cells were present, whereas in the optic nerve, you'll see the nuclei of oligodendrocytes. Then you should also draw two blood vessels in the center. A slight correction in this diagram is that central retinal artery will have a thick wall and an oval lumen, whereas the central retinal vein will have thin wall and a collapsed lumen. So if you remember the diagrams that you've drawn for artery and vein histology, you can draw something similar to that. The vein should be drawn with collapsed lumens. This is how you draw the histological diagram of optic nerve. Yes, so next we are going to learn about the ganglia. In the beginning of learning anatomy, I think the first diagram we've asked you to learn is the diagram of the spinal nerve. Okay, so this is the spinal cord. Okay, this is the dorsal aspect and the ventral aspect. Okay, or this is the posterior aspect. This is the anterior aspect. Within the spinal cord, there is the posterior horn of the spinal cord. The gray matter of spinal cord has a posterior horn. From that arises the dorsal root of spinal nerve. From the anterior horn arises the ventral root. The dorsal root and the ventral roots of the spinal nerve, they will join together to form a single spinal nerve. The spinal nerve will further divide into the further branching are called the rami, the anterior ramus and the posterior ramus. Now you look on the dorsal root, there is a swelling, which is called the dorsal root ganglion. The dorsal root ganglion is sensory in function. Whereas, okay, so whatever I describe right now, okay, all the spinal nerve and its components, it belongs to the somatic nervous system, which is for the voluntary activity of the body. Adjacent to the spinal cord, there is another chain of ganglia, which is the sympathetic ganglia. This belongs to the autonomic nervous system. And you can see there's a communication between the sympathetic ganglion and the somatic nervous system. The communication between the autonomic and the somatic nervous system is through something known as rami communicante. Okay, there's a communication between autonomic and somatic nervous system. Okay, so now we are going to learn about the ganglia. The sensory ganglion or the dorsal root ganglion. Can you tell me what kind of neurons are present within the sensory ganglion? You can type it in the chat. What is the type of neuron present in the sensory ganglia usually? Yes, it's the pseudo-unipolar neuron. Good. Okay, but one of these sensory ganglia, okay, one of the ganglia of the cranial nerves also contains bipolar neurons. Okay, this is an exception, a special feature for those of you who are interested to learn. So can you guess which ganglion it is? Okay, the clue is it belongs to the 8th cranial nerve. So which nerve is the 8th cranial nerve? Yes, good. The auditory or it is called the vestibulocochlear nerve. The vestibulocochlear nerve has a sensory ganglion which contains bipolar neurons. Just remember that special feature, keep it in mind. Yes, so to learn about the sensory ganglia, we're going to take the help of this person. I don't know if you are familiar with this character. Yes. Are you familiar with, okay. So as I'm describing these points, I would like you to take a note of it, because if we have time at the end of class, I might ask you to differentiate between spinal and sensory ganglion. Okay, it's a very important, frequently asked question. So let's take a look at the neurons here within the spinal ganglion. You can see it is a large diameter and they are oval in shape. That's about the size and the shape of the neurons within the spinal ganglion. And you look at the nucleus. Okay, see, the nucleus is central in position, and there is a prominent nucleolus as well. Okay, central nucleus. And they are present as a group. Okay, see, this is a group of neurons, and between different groups of neurons, there will be nerve fibers present in between. Okay, I'll show you a larger field. In spinal ganglion, the neuron will be present as organized groups. And this appearance of the nucleus is central, large, pale nucleus with a prominent nucleolus. That appearance is called vesicular appearance. Okay, so in histology, if you ever hear the term vesicular nucleus, it means a central, large, pale nucleus with a prominent nucleolus. Okay, so please remember that feature. It's very important. It will also help you to identify the slide under the microscope. And if this is the neuron, look at the surrounding rim of the neuron over here. Okay, surrounding the neuron, you can see other smaller nuclei arranged like a complete ring around the neuron. Okay, so in spinal ganglion, there are numerous satellite cells which will surround the neuron completely. See, even for this neuron, you can see smaller nuclei surrounding the neuron. These are the nuclei of the satellite cells surrounding the pseudo-unipolar neuron. This is just a larger field to show you. See, this is the group of pseudo-unipolar neurons organized in one area. This is another group. In between the groups, you can see the nerve fibers are present in between the groups of neurons. Okay, so the neurons are arranged, organized in one place, and different groups of neurons are separated by the nerve fibers. This is another picture to show you. Here's one group of neurons. This is another group. This is another group, and you can see how the nerve fibers are present in between them. This is another important identifying feature for spinal ganglion. And these nerve fibers, they are myelinated nerve fibers. The satellite cells I've already mentioned, they completely surround the neuron. So here we can see, look at the nuclear satellite cells again, it's completely surrounding the pseudo-unipolar neuron. So totally there are 7 points of differentiation. Okay. So just take a look at the points. That is the size, shape, groups, and nuclei of the neurons. Then it is about the nerve fibers and satellite cells. And one more point is that the Nissl granules are not prominent within the sensory ganglion. Okay, it's an additional point. Do you remember Nissl granules within the cell body of neuron is actually what organelle? Okay, which structure within the neuroplasm forms the Nissl bodies? We have learned it in last class. Yes, the rough endoplasmic reticulum is the Nissl substance. Good. So the Nissl substance is not easily seen within the neurons of the spinal ganglion. Just remember that point as well. This is how you will draw the histological diagram of spinal ganglion. Okay, here you're drawing the capsule of the ganglion. And you use the myelinated nerve fibers to divide the substance of the spinal ganglion into different groups. Now, how will you draw the neuron? Okay, to be a little careful drawing here. It should be a large oval pseudo-unipolar neuron, and the nucleus, you should draw it as an oval nucleus with a dot in between. Okay, that is the nucleolus. Okay, so please don't draw the nucleus only as a single dot or a single oval, but you should draw a central spherical nucleus. And within the center of that nucleus, you should put a dot, which is the nucleolus. And surrounding the pseudounipolar neurons, you draw the nuclei of satellite cells completely around it. Okay, and you have to label these nerve fibers as the myelinated nerve fibers. This is how you will draw the diagram of the spinal ganglion. So this large oval neuron with the vesicular nucleus arranged in groups. These are the features which will help you to identify the slide under the microscope. Okay, so this is just another picture just to show you the nucleus, how to draw it exactly. Okay, central oval nucleus or spherical, and in the center there is the nucleolus. This is the vesicular appearance. Okay, so now we're reaching the final part of the lecture regarding the autonomic nervous system. So I'll just first describe how will you learn the function of the sympathetic nervous system. Generally, when does the sympathetic nervous system come into action, or what kind of response is given by the sympathetic nervous system? You can type it in the chat. Yes. Is the sympathetic nervous system activated when you're at rest? Or yes, it is a fight or flight response. Okay, when you're faced with a situation which demands an action immediately. Okay, it's an emergency situation. That is the fight or flight response is when the sympathetic nervous system comes into play. You can remember this picture to understand the actions of the sympathetic nervous system. Okay, so what is the action of sympathetic nervous system on the body on each of these areas? Imagine if you're running away from a wild animal. Okay, here the lion is too cute, but you imagine if it's a dangerous one and the person is running for his life. So what will the body do in order to enable the person to face this fight or flight situation? Yes, so think about it. When the person is running, the pupils will dilate, okay, because you need to see more clearly. So sympathetic nervous system causes dilatation of the pupils. And when the person is running, they'll need increased heart rate, and the airways will also dilate to allow more air to come into the lungs. And there'll be increased sweating. As you all know, when you're tensed, you will have increased sweating. And also the digestive activities will be reduced. Okay, so there'll be reduced salivation and reduced gastric activity because the body wants to keep more energy for the muscles, the voluntary muscles for running in that situation. So there'll be less activity of the involuntary functions at that time. So these are the actions of the sympathetic nervous system. It is fight or flight response. Whereas for parasympathetic nervous system, yes, it is called rest and digest function. Okay, so sometimes when you're at home, you'll be relaxing like this after mom makes a good lunch and you just enjoy it and then have this postprandial alkaline tide and you just relax. So at that time, for resting and digesting, it is the parasympathetic nervous system which comes into play. So parasympathetic action will be right the opposite of sympathetic. Yes, so pupils will constrict, and then when you are having the food, salivation increases, and when you're resting, digestion will increase. And since the person is at rest, heart rate will decrease, airways will be constricted, and sweat glands are not active. The eccrine glands are not active. Okay, so these are the actions of the parasympathetic nervous system. So I just wanted to give you these pictures to make it a little easier for you to learn this, even for physiology. So these are the actions of sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. You can just go through it later. Just remember, fight or flight for sympathetic and rest and digest for parasympathetic. So now we're going to learn about the sympathetic ganglia. Okay, so this is just a little higher level topic about the nerves, the nerve fibers which are present within the sympathetic system. I'll just be describing it a bit, but only those who are interested can actually go into the detail and study this topic. Okay, it is not necessary for everyone. Just wanted to show you. See, earlier we had learned about the spinal nerve, which is present in the green color. Now we're going to look at the sympathetic ganglia, which is present beside the spinal cord. Okay, this is the sympathetic chain. Look at this one ganglion. Okay, so from the spinal cord, there are fibers called preganglionic fibers, which will enter into the sympathetic ganglion through the structure called white ramus communicants. Okay, white ramus communicants will communicate the spinal nerve with the sympathetic ganglion. Within the sympathetic ganglion, there is a neuron called the postganglionic neuron, and that will give rise to a fiber, which is the postganglionic fiber that will enter the spinal nerve through gray ramus communicants. The postganglionic fiber will go to the end organs and exert the action of the autonomic nervous system. This is just to give you an idea about how the sympathetic ganglion is connected to the spinal nerve through the rami communicants. Okay, so now we're just going to learn the features of the sympathetic ganglion. For that, I'd like you to remember this enthusiastic and talented child prodigy. Okay, so the size of the neurons here will be small, like the small child, and the shape of the neurons is somewhat star-shaped or irregular because the neuron here is multipolar neurons. And usually such smart people, they are somewhat disorganized. Yes, so the neurons here in the sympathetic ganglion, they will be scattered. They are not neatly organized. They are just scattered or disorganized, scattered neurons among the nerve fibers. The nucleus is eccentric, like certain people of these caliber. Nucleus are unmyelinated. That's just the opposite. No need of myelination here. It's rich in missile substance. And, you know, these kind of people tend to be aloof. So in the same way, these neurons, they have only a few supporting cells or a few satellite cells. So these are the differences between the spinal and the sympathetic ganglion. So we'll just take a look. The size of the neuron will be small. Okay, the size as compared to the spinal ganglion, the size of the neuron in sympathetic ganglion will be smaller. So when you're drawing in your record also, keep that in mind. Size of neuron is smaller. The shape of the neuron, just look, it is irregular. When you're drawing in your record, you can draw it somewhat star-shaped. But look in the slide, see this is one particular size. This is another size of the neuron. Okay, so they are of different size and shape. Okay, it's because they're having an irregular shape. The multipolar neurons there, so they have an irregular shape. And you see there's no particular organized groups. Okay, there's just a whole lot of neurons which is scattered among the nerve fibers. There is no group as such. And look at the nucleus. Okay, the nucleus here is eccentric, pushed to one side. Okay, the nucleus is eccentric for sympathetic ganglion. So here again, you can see the scattered multipolar neurons among the nerve fibers. Nerve fibers are unmyelinated. Missile substance is rich. That is just a point you have to learn. You may not see it clearly under the microscope. If you put high power in hematoxin the eosin slide, you may be able to see the rich missile substance. And the satellite cells, see, look at this particular neuron. The satellite cells are fewer in number as compared to the spinal ganglion. Okay, only few satellite cells will be present in the sympathetic ganglion. Okay, this is an extra point for sympathetic nervous system. The neurotransmitters are adrenaline, noradrenaline, and for the parasympathetic system, it is acetylcholine. This is more of physiology for you, the neurotransmitters which are present. So when you're drawing the sympathetic ganglion as well, see, this is the capsule or the epineurium continuation. And when you're drawing the neurons, draw it irregular or star-shaped. And remember, the size of these neurons should be smaller as compared to the size of the pseudo-unipolar neuron. The nucleus is eccentric, is present at one side. The neurons are present scattered throughout the ganglia. The nerve fibers are also present in between the neurons. It is not organized. And you see the satellite cells also, you're just drawing it scattered in between the neurons, and they're few in number. Okay. So now can you tell me, type in the chat, which neuron, okay, which ganglion is represented by the diagram A, and which ganglion is the diagram B? Just type it in the chat, easy question. Yes, A is the spinal ganglion or the sensory ganglion, and B is the sympathetic ganglion. Yes. Okay, so based on that, you should be able to write down the differences. Okay, the first size of neuron, you can see the difference. Sensory ganglion will be having a larger size, it is oval. The nucleus, if you take this diagram, nucleus will be central and vesicular, whereas for sympathetic, the nucleus is eccentric. The spinal ganglion, the cells are arranged in a group separated by nerve fibers. For sympathetic, the neurons are just scattered. And for spinal ganglion, the satellite cells are arranged completely surrounding the neuron. Here, satellite cells are few and just scattered abroad. These are myelinated nerve fibers. Neurons are rich in missile substance. Whereas for sympathetic ganglion, it is unmyelinated nerve fibers and few, and missile substance is not seen clearly. Oh, sorry, it's the opposite. For spinal ganglion, missile substance not seen. For sympathetic ganglion, rich in missile substance. Okay, so please learn these 7 points clearly between sensory and sympathetic ganglia. This is just another picture to show you optic nerve with the coverings and just the magnification of the pile septa. Okay, class, I'll be sending you these questions